Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley for Ellen Hudson. Thanks for joining me today. In this month's edition of the In Touch newsletter, we are going to take a look at the new Alcohol Lift Ink Pad. We're going to explore and play, and we're going to have a inky, fun time. So I wanted to start out by showing you a few of the supplies you might see in this video tutorial today. Of course, you're going to see the Alcohol Lift Ink Pad. Now, this is designed to work with alcohol inks to kind of lift ink off of a non-porous surface, and then you can use that ink and deposit it onto a porous surface. We're going to talk about some of the key elements of this here in this video tutorial, so be sure you stay tuned. It is a felt pad, and it is kind of a clear ink, and you can see right on the top of this lid, it says, to lift ink from a non-porous surface. Alcohol ink from a non-porous surface. It's going to be important, and I'm going to talk to you about that here. Now, I also have my alcohol inks here. I have several colors. I've kind of acquired several of them because the more I play with them, the more fun I have and the more colors I have to have. That's just how it goes. And I have it stored in one of the Tim Holtz alcohol ink storage tins. This is also great for re-inkers as well. Now, I'm going to be using some of the blending solution, and I'll also be using some isopropyl alcohol. This is actually a 99%. You don't want to use the 70%, which is what you'll find most commonly at the drugstore. You can find the 99% at the drugstore, but you have to look. Now, remember I talked about porous surfaces. This is Yupo paper. This is not alcohol ink cardstock. That's very important. Yupo paper comes in both a bright white and a translucent version. And this is important because Yupo paper is non-porous. It is kind of a plasticky paper. This is the transparent here, or the translucent, and I'm going to show you the white next to it so you can kind of see them up next to each other. So you can see definitely the other one's kind of vellum-like. Because it's made kind of a plastic material, it is non-porous. Now, other examples of non-porous surfaces include like plastic, metal, glass, porcelain tiles. Those are all things that you can use with this lift ink. Now, I'll also show you the alcohol ink tool set, which is some brushes that will not dissolve in solvent, and also the alcohol ink blending or applicator tool as well, which is much like the blending tool for the distress inks, but it has a felt pad instead. Now, Mama don't want to mess up her manicure. I've learned my lesson about alcohol inks and manicures. So I'm a nurse. I'm comfortable in gloves. I'm just going to glove up anytime that my hands might get messy or my manicure might get messed up. And this is one of those situations. You'll also notice that I've cut down my Yupo paper. It comes in 5x7 sheets, so I've cut it down in half to 3.5x5. This makes for a great 4-bar size card, or it mounts really nicely on an A2 size card as well. And on this first background, I added alcohol to the background. I added my alcohol ink, and now I'm moving it around with my alcohol ink paintbrush. Now, the great thing about alcohol ink is it is very forgiving and it is very loose. And so you can fix some mistakes. I have an alcohol swab here. I'm just removing some of the ink. Then I can go back in and add more ink to those areas that I didn't really like. And I'm going to use some blending solution and some metallic mixative as well. Now, I'm not sure that the lift ink will pull up the metallic mixative, and I did not get a chance to kind of test it out. So I'm not sure. I'm just gonna leave it like that. If it's something that you've experimented with, be sure to leave it in the comments below so that everybody else can figure it out. And if I do get a chance to kind of test this out using the metallic mixatives, I will report back as well. Now, you can also use your alcohol ink applicator to apply ink to your Yupo paper. Now, once again, I want to remind you that I'm using Yupo paper because it's non-porous. Alcohol ink cardstock, which is also made by Ranger, is porous, so it will not work for this technique. And it also tends to work a little bit differently with the alcohol inks. The alcohol inks tend to move and play more on the Yupo cardstock or the Yupo paper than they do the alcohol ink cardstock. That's because the alcohol ink cardstock is a porous surface. Now here I've added my ink directly onto the Yupo paper. I've added some blending solution, and now I'm just kind of picking up the cardstock and I'm moving the color around, and then I'm going to set it aside to dry. I'm just showing you a few different ways to kind of create backgrounds using alcohol ink. Now, I did another newsletter where we did some alcohol ink backgrounds, and we used Copic refills as well as the Ranger alcohol inks. And I'll be sure to throw that in a link below and also in a card up above in this YouTube video so that you can check that out. This video, I just kind of wanted to show you a little bit of my play and my exploration with the alcohol ink backgrounds, and then really walk you through how the alcohol ink lift ink works. So I'm just kind of playing here. A lot of my backgrounds ended up being rainbow. It's really interesting to me that when you start really playing with these, the alcohol and the blending solution really do play a little bit differently with the alcohol inks. It's almost like the alcohol obliterates the ink more, whereas the blending solution kind of pushes it more. I'm not sure exactly. I'm hoping that you can kind of see a little bit of that. The alcohol's in the bowl over on my left, and then the blending solution's in this bottle here. And I'm kind of hoping that as I add the different mediums, you can kind of see a difference in how the ink moves. Now, this here is my favorite technique for creating the backgrounds, and it's just using a straw and kind of blowing the ink around. Now, I'm going to tell you where to get your straw. You got to get the venti straw from Starbucks. And I know you're paying $4 for a drink, so they can afford to give you an extra straw with that venti caramel macchiato that you ordered, that iced venti caramel macchiato. So when you're in Starbucks next time, you just grab an extra one of those venti straws and keep it in your craft stash, and you can have it for your alcohol ink backgrounds. I no longer have mine because my daughter put her mouth on it, and this mama don't share straws with nobody, not even my husband or my daughter. So next time I go to Starbucks, I got to get another straw for my alcohol ink backgrounds. So I just kind of wanted you to see a little bit of this creative process. I really just took an evening and I went in and I played. And I think that's the best way to get to know a medium. I had no expectations about what I was going to end up with. I was just playing to see what I could come up with. Now, once these dried, I did find that you could kind of come in and alter these. And I'm adding those little drops of alcohol in and then just kind of blowing a little bit to kind of move areas around to kind of create some more of those lighter areas where the ink had gotten really deep and dark. This is a great way to come back and add a little more texture to your alcohol ink background. You can see the original one was kind of a really nice smooth color, but I like those areas where you kind of get the, I don't know how to say it, but you get the cells or something where the ink is kind of a little bit lighter and kind of pushes out towards the edge. So like I said, I had a blast creating, and I created a ton of alcohol ink backgrounds. Now, I have to tell you, I didn't love every single one of them. This one here is on the translucent cardstock. I just wanted to show you that. So, you know, I might cut them down. I might die cut them. I don't use them all in my projects today, but I got to know my alcohol inks so well by just doing this and playing with no expectations and just seeing what I came up with. You're going to see a lot of rainbow themed ones because I like bright colors. You're going to see some with lots of colors, some with just a few. I love this color combination here. And I even let my daughter in on the action. She tends to craft on her own. I tend to craft on my own. And she had so much fun creating with these as well. She took what she learned from her alcohol ink play with me right here. This one, those two are hers. And she ran right into her room and started applying it to her watercolors because she thought it was so much fun to blow that ink around with the straw. So she ran into her room to create with the watercolors. And you can do this with watercolors. Just make sure you have enough water on your cardstock to move that color around. So for my stamps today, I'm going to be lifting the ink from these alcohol ink backgrounds. These are non-porous backgrounds. I'm going to be lifting the ink off of these backgrounds and stamping it onto a porous surface. Now, a porous surface is something like alcohol ink cardstock, your Neenah Solar White cardstock, wood, fabric. those are all porous surfaces. So once again, you want to move this from a non-porous surface to a porous surface. And if you want to kind of have this all mapped out for you, be sure to visit the coordinating blog post because I'm going to have all of this kind of written out for you as well. Now I've inked up my stamp and I'm stamping it onto this alcohol ink background. I'm going to press all over to make sure I get good coverage here. And then I am going to open up my MISTI, and the ink that has lifted from this background will be on the stamp. So I'm going to move my alcohol ink Yupo background over to the side, and I'm going to bring in some Neenah Solar White cardstock. This is also cut to 3.5 by 5. And I'm going to stamp this stamp onto this porous surface. This is going to give me kind of a 2-for-1. I'm going to end up with this piece here that I stamped on the Neenah Solar White that I can use for a card project. And that alcohol ink background where I'm lifting the ink from, you're going to end up with a ghosted image. So you can see I didn't get a great image on that porous surface the first time. So I'm going to clean my stamp. Really important that you start with a clean stamp every time you're going to apply your alcohol lift ink to your stamp. You want it to be squeaky clean because that is a clear ink and a white felt ink pad. You're going to end up with a big old mess if you have ink on this stamp when you go to ink it up with that white felt ink pad again. So I've cleaned it. I'm using some Hero Arts Ultra Clean. And then I'm going to put my alcohol ink background right back into the MISTI, right where it was before. I'm going to ink up my stamp again with the alcohol lift ink, and then I'm going to stamp it onto this alcohol ink background once again. So it's stamping right in the same area that it did the first time. Once again, I'm going to press all over the stamp to make sure that I get good contact in all areas. I'm going to lift out my Yupo paper alcohol ink background. I'm going to put my Neenah Solar White cardstock back into the MISTI right where it was before. And I'm going to stamp this again. And this is going to allow me to lift more ink from the original alcohol ink background that's on the Yupo paper and deposit it onto this porous surface, which is the Neenah Solar White. And you can see that now I have this really beautiful rainbow stamped image, and it's like using your alcohol ink background as a stamp pad. It's kind of like that. And you can use whatever colors you want. So now to lift the ink from this original alcohol ink background, I'm taking a clean paper towel and I'm starting to dab the areas where I've applied the alcohol lift ink to this background that's on the Yupo paper. It's going to start lifting that ink off, and you can see my image emerging from this background. Now, once I get a lot of that ink lifted off the surface, I'm going to take a clean paper towel and I'm going to start buffing. And then I have the reveal of that sentiment right in that alcohol ink, which I think is so cool. You're left with like this really cool ghosting effect. It doesn't lift all the way to white. I wouldn't say that it lifts all the way to white, but it lifts a ton of that color off and you have this really cool ghosted image. Once again, I'm going to clean my stamp really well with my Hero Arts Ultra Clean. You just want to make sure that this stamp is squeaky clean before you start inking it up once again with your alcohol lift ink. Now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to do it on this rainbow background. Now you're going to see here that I am actually stamping this twice onto the alcohol ink background. I just found that I had better results if I did kind of a double lift here where I'm inking it up, stamping it onto the alcohol ink background, and then moving that to the Neenah, and then replacing it and inking it up again and stamping onto the Neenah again. If your goal is not to use that porous surface, the Neenah Solar White kind of cardstock piece that you're creating, you can probably just lift the ink from this alcohol ink background with just one press on here. You can see that it's already lifting from there. And once I buff that off, you'll get that really cool ghosting effect. So if you don't want to do this part of the technique here where I'm stamping it onto the Neenah Solar White cardstock, you definitely don't have to. But this is a great way to get kind of two cards for the price of one. Maybe it's not technically for the price of one, but you're getting a couple of different projects out of that same alcohol ink background that you created. So I'm going to continue to show you this process, and I'm going to talk to you about a few of the things I learned as I was kind of going along. Number one, this alcohol lift ink is a very slippery ink. So yes, you can do this with an acrylic block, but be careful that you're stamping straight down and lifting straight up, because this ink, it's not sticky like Versamark ink. It's very different consistency. It kind of has a really slick kind of glide to it. So you want to make sure that as you're pressing your stamp down onto the surface of that Yupo paper, which is also kind of slick because it's non-porous, that you're stamping straight down and lifting straight up so that you don't get kind of a muddled image. Now, I also experimented with some fine line, kind of more detail image stamps, and it worked beautifully with that as well. The other thing I want to caution you is that you don't have to over ink the stamp. Just make sure you get good coverage, because that ink transfers very well to the Yupo cardstock, and it will kind of pool up there if you're using too much ink. So just make sure that you have the entire surface of your stamp coated with the alcohol lift ink, and don't over ink it. Now, the next thing that I want to remind you is that paper is everything. Like I said, you have to start with a non-porous surface. It says it right on the ink pad. So if you're trying this with alcohol ink cardstock, it's not going to work. The Yupo paper is a non-porous surface, so it's allowing me to, it's really, the ink is drying on the surface of the paper. It's not soaking down into fibers. If you use a porous surface for your original alcohol ink background, you're not going to be able to lift the ink up off of that background and transfer it. It's not going to work. It's not how it's designed. So as I say, with Copic coloring and with watercolor and with colored pencils, the kind of paper you use really does matter, and this technique is no exception. So here you're seeing me work with another one of the Essentials by Ellen stamps here. This one says "You Are Enough," and it is one of my favorite completed projects. The colors I used on this background are Flamingo, Shell Pink, and Wild Plum, and I love the way those colors look together. Now, I kept these cards really simple to finish them off. I added some gold hearts. I added a couple of them to some alcohol ink backgrounds. I added some strips of gold cardstock because I really wanted to keep this technique the focus of these cards. I did heat emboss some sentiments that kind of went along with these larger sentiments on some vellum and attach those to the card fronts as well. And I just have to say, I had so much fun playing not only with the alcohol inks, but seeing how this lift ink really just pulled that ink off the surface of the Yupo paper, and then seeing that I could just transfer it onto another card front and have two projects out of this as well. So there you have it, several projects here for you today featuring alcohol ink and the new Ranger Alcohol Lift Ink ink pad. I hope you enjoyed these projects. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you really learned something from it, because I have to say I learned so much during this process. As always, I will have links to the featured products in the description at YouTube, but head on over to the coordinating blog post, which will be linked below. Over there, I'll have more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies for you. Thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you won't miss any of our paper crafting and card making video tutorials. And until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.